Welcome to episode 6 of Agency Intensive. I'm Richard Hill, your host. Now, in this episode, I'll speak with Simon Penson, exited agency founder, VC and NED to agencies and SaaS companies. Now, Simon ran one of the first content marketing agencies here in the UK, which he started back in 2009. Now, fast forward to 2020, it was integrated on the way and ultimately sold in 2020 for circa 37 million. We cover a lot of ground in this one, so buckle up. We cover the early days, growing from 0 to 12 people, 12 to 50 employees, and so on until we get all the way to 250 people in his agency. Maintaining a culture during those high growth years, the levers that Simon focused on, and the details of the deal structure that ultimately resulted in a £37 million valuation. And so much more in this one. Now, if you do me one favour, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Now, let's head over to this fantastic episode. Well, welcome to the Agency Intensive podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me and in this wonderful studio as well. One of the better ones, for sure.
Well, that's very kind, very kind. So I think before we get into the nitty-gritty of agency life and your journey, I think it'd be great for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and how you got into the world of agencies.
It's a good question and a convoluted probably story behind it, but I'm sure we'll get into it. But I mean, if I start at the beginning, I was originally a journalist, actually. I was lucky because I always kind of knew what I wanted to do. I always had a fascination with the written word and how it had this kind of almost unique ability to kind of draw an audience. And I was all right at English, which obviously helps. Not very good at many other things, but all right at English. And sort of did some vocational training in that world and kind of through a process of network really ended up moving to Peterborough and working for a big kind of PLC at the time. And they were a really big print publishing business called EMAP at the time. They're now called Bauer. Many people will know them. And I rose through the ranks there, I guess, relatively quickly. I was sort of editing as a magazine business at the time. So this is sort of early 2000s by this point, editing magazines and, really enjoying doing it. A lot of them specialist titles, worked in all sorts of specialist markets like angling and golf and cars and all sorts of things. Learned lots, worked with some great, very smart people, had some great bosses. But alongside that, I was always interested in how things worked as well. So I was sort of very, very early 2000s, maybe even late 90s. I was building my own sites as well in Dreamweaver was at the time and Joomla eventually and all of those kind of...
We've still got a few clients on that.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. Still around. And I did that because I said I had this intrigue about how things worked, but I was ultimately producing them so I could put content into them. And they, over time, I mean, they looked awful. They were terrible sites, really. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to go way back now, but... They did all right, and some of them failed. There were specialist niche sites, basically. Yeah. So, I mean, we had one in divorce and cosmetic surgery and kitchens and all sorts of things, where there was basically a fairly significant transaction in that market. Advice sites, and over time, I was running this kind of dual life of in the evenings, I was building sites and learning lots, and during the day, I was doing the day job at the corporate world of print publishing. These beautiful print products were going like that. However good they were, meanwhile, this awful sites were actually going the other way. And it was a real budgie in the mine shaft moment, actually, for me. I could see that there was a seismic shift happening. It seems the most obvious thing to say now, doesn't it, of course? But back then, we didn't quite know the impact of the internet. And that really played out between sort of 2000, let's say, and sort of 2007, 2008. I kind of had this dual life. And then towards the back end of that period, the business I was working in, EMAP at the time, by this point I was actually working online, so I was actually helping them sort of take a lot of their bigger brands online. Yeah. We worked with McKinsey at the time to try and understand where the kind of the money was and prioritise. But Bauer came in and bought that business, and they were a big sort of family-owned print, basically family dynasty business. And they didn't want to really, really invest into the kind of digital world, which to me was crazy. So I kind of made the decision at that point to take a chance, run with the sites. They weren't making a huge amount of money at all. enough to pay the bills.
So you jumped ship at that point, sort of thing, and thought, right, I'll do my own thing.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and it felt like a big thing. And, to begin with, we were, selling possessions on eBay and all sorts of things, to make the numbers work. But, they were earning enough. And then, so this 2007-ish time, and then for a year I did that. And actually the sites, because I was on them full time, they did a bit better. Ended up selling a couple of them. Not a real exit, that people would claim, but, enough certainly to, give me a good 12-month runway of things.
Yeah.
And did that and sort of used really, I guess, what I'd learned from building those sites and building the audiences and the value in them to try and help businesses do it. And by this point, so it's 2008, 9. And a lot of those people were still not really ready, quite frankly. They didn't really understand the impact of the internet. Most spend was not digital for sure. The world looked a bit different. Like Facebook was, it was certainly live globally, but it was still really very uncommercialized, all that kind of stuff. So it was a different world. But and obviously I'd come from the content world, so I'd really pushing the content kind of view, and a lot of people didn't really get it. So we had to, out of necessity, really build a sales and marketing first organization, which at the time was really hard work, but in the end meant that we grew really quickly and certainly scaled past some of the problems that other people come up against. But we grew really slowly. So between sort of beginning of 2009, when we officially launched, to 2012-ish, we got to sort of 10, 12 people. Always bootstrapped, always profitable, but, slow growth, very ordinary agency. But we were really, really promoting this kind of content-led ethos. And, at the time, nobody, very few other people were. That kind of ethos really became this kind of content marketing kind of world that we all now know very well. And we were certainly one of the first, if not the first, to really champion that in the way that we know now. And obviously that helped us eventually. To begin, it was really hard work, but, we did a lot of work on sales and marketing, and we built a bit of brand. We refined and defined what it was that we actually offered. And slowly brands came around and the spend started to move, and, we started to pitch bigger and bigger business, and we then went on a real growth spurt. And so between 12 and sort of end of 14, we sort of got to 50 odd people. So we went from sort of 12 to 50 odd people quite quickly. So chapter 2. Yeah. Lots of lessons in that. Growth is good, but it can still be a challenge. And we came across actually what was one of the most frustrating periods of my professional life, I would say, in that by this point, we were a decent size, so 50 odd people. We were pitching for big brand work, but they were still not used to spending the money that they really needed to spend. Sort of 20, 30K a month retainers were not, very well known then at all. They were certainly harder to find in the content marketing world. And we were going into pitches, we were winning hands down. The marketers loved us because we were offering something different. They were like, where can we buy? But then at that level, you sort of start to bump up against procurement, and they're looking at us going, well, don't we usually buy IBM when it comes to, IT? Was their kind of view, well, who are these, who's this 30-year-old CEO pretender?
Yeah, just 50 people type thing.
Yeah. And that, and that was really frustrating because it's like chicken and egg, isn't it? How do you solve that? And, we were still winning well. We were still growing quickly. But at the time, we were also getting quite a lot of approaches for acquisition, because obviously we were the fast growth, new kids on the block, so to speak. And, I was certainly not in the world of wanting to do that because of the fact that we would, still had a long way to play out. But one of those conversations came from an agency in Leeds called Stickyeyes, and lots of people will know. And the conversation there really grew and grew. Really liked them, had a really great culture. They'd had a slightly tougher period. I think it's probably not fair to say they'd grown. They started in '99, grew really big off the back of old school SEO. Got some great clients, some great people, but they found it more difficult as this content sort of thing was coming in. So over a period of time, I was a single founder that side. We got to know people, we got to know each other. Spent 6 months talking and realised that actually 1 + 1 = 3. They had a lot of the unlock because we all of a sudden, collectively, I think there were about 75, 80 people at the time. We were 50 odd people. Collectively, we solved the issue that we had. And obviously for them, we brought in content marketing. Yeah. So we had the sales machine, and we did that and merged the businesses in August 16. May 15. Sorry, and we came together. We were 125-ish people, 2 offices. Put the news out, and obviously, as you can imagine, the world sort of sat up, and we immediately actually had quite a lot of inbound, acquisition kind of opportunity come to us. And we weren't planning to sell. I mean, we'd obviously always chatted and saying, we're going to become a really interesting independent here. And that was always the goal, but we didn't expect it to happen so fast. So, we merged in May 15, announced it, and by August 16, we'd been acquired through a process that ultimately ended in Interpublic buying us. And we took I remember the debates around this, because we had obviously choices, and we took a deal structure that most people told us we were crazy for, which was kind of less upfront and a longer earn out. And obviously most people tell you to do the opposite of that. But I think because we'd merged the 2 businesses, we had we'd really, really enterprise back office. We had a brilliant senior team, much better than the size of the agency, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of, over-invested almost. So we really backed ourselves to grow. And I think we'd also figured out how to really commercialize account management and, kind of land and expand. So we backed ourselves to do that and took a earn out that went from August 16 to the end of 2020. And we grew really significantly. We went into that business, say 125 people, and we came out the other end. It's difficult to know because obviously then it was 2020 was COVID, wasn't it? But sort of 270-ish people perhaps. Obviously a lot of that had happened in the last year because our sort of compound annual growth rate was really significant. I mean, we were probably trucking on to, 10 million EBITDA kind of run rate. We didn't hit that in a year. We were quite a bit down on that, but equally we were really growing fast to the end. And, hugely successful kind of exit, obviously, in the end. Lots of people did great, which is fantastic. Learned lots, stressed lots, slept little, all of those things.
Yeah.
But thankfully, because of the senior team, we spent I spent more and more time basically working on the integration as opposed to the business because the business was really running. So I spent a bit of time on integration.
What integration of the different businesses together?
Yeah. So Interpublic, really interfacing with Interpublic because obviously through an earn out, the challenge is always that there's this kind of tension. It's not a brilliant way actually to do a deal because, you've got, we want to control their P&L. They don't want to give you work even though they tell you that they're going to.
Yep.
Understandably, because why would they give you £1 if they've got to pay you £7 or £8 for it?
Yeah.
So, that never manifests itself. But we didn't expect it to either. So we very much kind of were masters of our own destiny. But, there's this kind of weird situation where you're trying to integrate, but you don't really want to, and it becomes a distraction. So you want the team to just be able to work and get on with it. So spent time, interfacing there to make sure that wasn't the case. And, ended up probably last 12 months, very, very light touch, really, because it wasn't staying. Neither was the other founder. And, the business was running brilliantly, and the numbers were great. So, very kind of board level involvement, really. And that allowed me to spend and start leaning into, what is it that I wanted to do next? Because, as we were talking before this, it's important to have that plan because not enough people do, actually. And it's a really big transition. And thankfully, in 2016, when we'd seen some of the cash from the initial deal, I started angel investing into sort of B2B SaaS. And the sort of reason I did that really, because it felt a little bit to me, I mean, it seems ridiculous to say back in 2016, but I guess it is nearly 10 years
It's a while ago
now.
Yeah.
That world to me really felt a little bit like the websites did back in the sort of early 2000s to me.
Yeah.
This thing's going to be big. And, there was still a lot of opportunity in it. And I was fascinated by it and started to back a few founders and realised quite quickly, actually, that world was broken is probably a bit harsh, but was fairly inefficient because, these people often were first-time founders. They were often very technical and brilliant. Can they run a business? Do they have the commerciality?
Sales and marketing side needed
all of that? And the answer was usually no. But what they did have is they were given a load of cash, and actually all that did is make things worse. Because, all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't have to worry about a P&L, and, I'm just going to spend it. And so, I realised that was pretty broken, and, started helping and supporting that a little bit. And met, again, long story short, met sort of 3 other people with the same worldview. And we started investing together. And then sort of very organically, really, we kind of ended up building a fund that invested other people's money, that business called Hatch, and launched an SEIS, EIS fund back officially in 2018. Yeah. And we were a bit broader actually at the beginning. The business is now very much B2B SaaS and is actually not just early stage, building later stage funds now. But to begin with, we were kind of a little bit broader, but now sort of really focused down on B2B SaaS. And I think that was brilliant for me, particularly when I first left, because it sort of did 2 things. It started to validate the stuff that we learned, actually, because when you're going through that journey, you survive it. It's probably the best way to describe it. You've never done it before, certainly at that scale, so you are building the road as you go, right?
Yeah.
But then when you start to see it through other people's eyes, it really becomes very validating for that journey. And I really, really also enjoyed it. Quite frankly, it still doesn't feel like work. And, I think in that you find the really important thing at post-exit, which is actually purpose and understanding why you do it. Because, I think initially when you're working, you obviously do it because you've got to pay the bills and, there's the financial pressures. But obviously when that burden is taken away from you, through an exit, it sort of strips everything back a little bit, and you have to really find the answer to that. And I found it really quickly in that process, and I'll always be thankful for that. And I really enjoyed helping these founders and helping sort of smooth the path a little bit and make it slightly less painful. And then that business has really rocked on. It's a fantastic business led by a couple of great people called Scott and Fred now, and I've actually backed off that business in the last sort of 3 months more so, because I think what began to happen is that the SEIS, EIS world is really obviously limited by how much money you can put into these businesses. They're early stage, so you kind of really have to ensure that you're not filling them with pockets with too much cash, and you're not taking too much percentage either, because otherwise, where's the incentive for the founders to keep going, because they're probably going to want to re-raise. So you end up with a smallish amount of lots of businesses, and that fund has now got probably just over 100 investments.
Wow!
Now at the beginning, when I first started it, we were into single figures, and it was fantastic because I could spend probably far too much time with a small number of investments. But how do you properly impact 100? That's really difficult, and I think I was lucky. And the thing that actually made me realise this a little bit was the fact that over the last year, I've started to do a little bit of work with private equity as well, because they're increasingly interested in the agency marketing services world. And obviously they're brilliant financial investors, but they don't necessarily know the detail and the nuance of the agency world. And so they lean on people like me that have been there a little bit to try and help them understand that. And so started to do a bit of work with them probably about a year ago, and I think through that process realised that actually this makes sense, because they're putting a much bigger number into a much smaller number of businesses, and therefore you can really lean in and really help and get involved. And yes, I really, really enjoyed it, and so really kind of starting to spend a bit more time in that space now and see where it leads. And
what a journey, Simon. So from working at EMAP with a sprinkle of an idea of, this content marketing thing, let's give it a try sort of thing, and then making your first hire or two, getting to 12, hit the 12, then hit the 50, then merge with Stickyeyes to 125.
Yep.
Then merged again, or sold, and then built to would you say 375 or 275?
Yeah, I mean, difficult to know really, but I think about 270. I mean, revenue was over 20 million to give you a sense.
So 270, 20 million, then exited that, and then obviously set up your own investment brand portfolio, and
and built that to 100 investments. And then now that sort of runs itself-ish. And then you're very much more now back, sort of working on the agency side, helping investors and your own interests in agencies.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice summary.
So there's a lot to get into. So I think let's go back to that. I remember quite well when I set up my agency and sort of looking at who's who and who's doing what. And you'd look on moz.com, or SEO Moz as it was back in the day, and now moz.com. And I remember reading an article that said something like the most viewed content or pieces of content on Moz was not Rand, was not other, it was you. So in terms of really pushing that content marketing side, I think talk to us about that, because I think that will really resonate, or should resonate, with aspiring agency owners that are trying to scale to that, whether whatever point it is, trying to go from 10 to 20 to 20 to 50, or from 2 mil to 4 mil.
Yeah.
Sort of leveraging an area of marketing, and in that case, very much content marketing, and then leveraging, I assume, a platform like Moz to be able to do that.
Yeah.
How important was that? And what would you say to maybe an agency owner listening now that, wants to leverage their expertise more? How should they go about that now?
It's it's a very big question. And it's also changed, right?
Yeah.
I think, in some ways I had it easier. I think it's fair to say. Obviously it perhaps didn't feel like it then, but looking back, it was, it was less fragmented. The audience was less fragmented. Yeah. But, I think, and obviously I understood the value of it being a journalist. But we really built it through just sheer determination and hard work and doing the same thing over and over again for, perhaps more time than most people think is sane. And really that really consisted of that sort of work around, on our own site, but also guest posting, as it was known, has obviously taken on another meaning now. And then speaking at a lot of events.
Yeah.
Really. They were the main two levers that we pulled. And they really helped us, particularly when it came to sort of allowing us to take the next step up to, work with better brands. And, a lot of the kind of initial conversations that we had with the bigger brands that we started to win came from stepping off a stage or, to your point, I read this thing on Moz, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. I think I remember, I'm sure, a guide you'd written on, the Penguin update or the Panda update going back. Yeah. And I think, I'm pretty sure we sort of modelled some of our sort of next steps. Oh, this is really good. That was you, back 12 years ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Long time ago. Yeah. And, of course, the market, there's a bit of luck in timing in these things, isn't it? The market really played into my expertise, which is obviously really helpful. You can't legislate for that. You can only run with it. And I remember at the time I had a mentor, an American guy at the time, and he'd sort of been he was not from the agency world, actually. He was a Californian, been an early employee at Apple and all sorts of stuff. Very interesting guy. I remember me talking to him one night on Skype, as it was at the time, and sort of telling him how we were doing and the fact that we were getting some traction. And he's like, Simon, I'm not going to do the American accent, but you've got to stop and you've got to write it like you stole it. Yeah. Basically, the market is coming to you.
Yeah.
And so, you've got to do more and more of that. And that really spurred us on. And I think, and I also have the privilege now of, because I work with a wider set of B2B businesses now, because obviously I work through SaaS, B2B, obviously work through all sorts of different agencies, a couple of professional service businesses on a consultancy basis. And, you get to see through that lens, a very privileged view in what is working in B2B and how it is different. So I think going back to your, initial kind of question around, what does a founder take now? And I think content still sits at the heart of it. And I think people lose that. That, it comes down to your ability to still produce great, expertise led, give it away and they will come. Yeah. Is really good advice. But then obviously you've got to become a bit more proficient, and it is more complex in sharing that in the right places at the right time now. And you've got to repurpose a lot more across many more channels and all that kind of stuff. But it comes back to actually something that I've learned a huge amount from SaaS, actually, because SaaS is a world that is much more competitive. You have to be much more on top of your game from a marketing perspective, actually. SaaS are great at it. And I've learned a lot through their eyes in terms of how you get that right. And it goes back to the really simple stuff that an old publisher once told to me in print, that, stay close to your audience and you'll never be wrong.
Yeah.
Truly understanding that, and, understanding ICP and understanding proper pain points.
Yeah.
Really focusing that content in on those things in a prioritized order, and then proliferating that across the internet, right?
So a lot more platforms now, but fundamentally, expert-led content. Obviously, back in the day, there was no podcast, probably back in football, maybe there was, I'm trying to think, 14 years ago.
Yeah, not really.
But ultimately, knowing your shit, knowing what you're doing, and obsessing over quality content, getting it out there. Obviously, there's a lot more channels now, so you probably need...
There are.
You've probably got to put more time and more resource into the additional channels and work with people that have got those channels or that expertise, but ultimately similar to back then.
Yeah, it really is. And it is more complex from a strategic perspective, but then equally, once you've got the framework, it's rinse and repeat. I think there is a smarter way of working. Certainly putting CRM front and center, I think, is a really great way to kind of work strategically now. And as I said, that comes back to really owning your audience and staying close to them, and then initially attracting them through something, whether that's a piece of blog content, lead magnet or whatever it is. Getting to know them through your CRM, and then having what we probably call SDRs, but they look a bit different now, as real nurture kind of people to help them along and give them more similar content and get to know them as potential prospects. Right?
So we've touched on sales and marketing.
Yep.
And I think, we could probably talk about content marketing, expert marketing for a whole episode, but I think there's a lot more to go at. So I think, obviously, you've started the agency, you've gone from 0 to 12 to 50. Let's sort of stay there for a little while.
Yep.
And obviously going from, working in your bedroom probably back in the day, which is where I think all of our listeners started, and then, we've got 10 people. We've got 50 people. I mean, it doesn't just happen. But ultimately, that's a hell of a shift from working for yourself and I think a self-proclaimed sort of wordsmith sitting and creating. And then all of a sudden, not quite all of a sudden, but quite a short period later, you've got 50 people. Talk to me about sort of maintaining that culture during that, or maintaining a culture during that very, very rapid growth in a matter of a handful of years, going from, one or two mates probably that you knew-ish to then, all these people work for me now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very big thing. And when you're doing it for the first time, which I was, you do have to make it up a little bit as you go along. But I think, I think culture is a fascinating thing because, how do you touch and feel it and what is it? I think the key thing for me, and I talk a lot to founders about this now, is that when you're an early stage business, you kind of have to have a really kind of mission or purpose led edict, like reason to exist. The Simon Sinek why stuff is really important in that kind of environment, because quite frankly, you don't have a lot of the stuff that a bigger business has. Bigger businesses have people teams, HR teams, people to organise fancy days out and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not that that's culture necessarily, but, they can also run performance culture, which we moved to because our culture changed and had to change.
Yeah.
And that's definitely important to consider. But at the beginning, I say, as a founder, you have to be the man or the lady on a white horse running up and down the line, saying, for God and country, in this direction, are you with me? Whatever that mission is, and people have to believe it. And so I think that belief system, that inner belief system is the most important thing to proliferate really early on, and understand it first and foremost, so you can talk about it, but also you can see it in others. And that allows you to hire the right people. Because I think we went through an awful period where we hired some of the wrong people and had to make some really tough decisions quite early.
Yeah.
Because not necessarily there weren't, single bad apple spoils the orchard. There was probably a little bit of that, but more so we got it wrong. We'd hired the wrong type of people for the organisation culture that we wanted to build. And it took us a while to realise that. But eventually we did, and we realised that actually we were hiring people more so for skill set than we were for fit.
Yeah.
And we ended up looking for what we call this kind of, burning desire to learn, this, kind of almost insatiable appetite really for learning, voracious appetite. And once we realised that, we started to hire, we almost didn't realise at the time, but we were hiring on that, and all of a sudden things seemed better. And we were aligned then, you see. We had the same belief system, so we fought for the same thing. So every time I did stand up and, sword in hand, everybody was behind me.
Door backing you,
Yeah. But then interestingly, there is a point at which that becomes your problem in the scaling process because, smaller businesses need it, bigger businesses don't need it. And, eventually there comes a time where, and this quarter's out, you have to sort of evolve culture into much more performance-led actually and look for high performers.
Yeah.
Because by that point, it's not just the founder's voice and shouldn't be the founder's voice because that becomes self-limiting. So then you almost need, you're obviously professionalizing the kind of, personal development and the lines of management and all of that, kind of the communications, all that kind of stuff. And, you should be right, but you can't making those people accountable for running those teams. And, if you continue to be the founder that shouts too loudly, people are always looking back to you, whereas you want them to look at the people that aren't.
Take responsibility, ownership. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
so what stage was that, do you think? Was that like 20, 30, 40 people-ish? That's quite a range.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. It's a long time ago now. I would say probably 50 to 60 people is when it really stopped. Or at least I say we actually realised.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we probably could have and should have put it right earlier.
Yeah.
But we realised at that sort of stage that it was starting to become a problem because people weren't necessarily looking to line managers that were still coming further up the chain.
Yeah.
And also people can fight too hard in the end for the wrong things. And actually that transition is really interesting. And I had this conversation all the time. I had it last week actually with a client who, they're scaling, they're at that sort of level. A year ago, they were probably half that number of people. And the individual in the business was one of those individuals that we all have had where, you think if they leave, we're screwed. You sort of sleepless nights stuff.
Everyone's got one of those on their journey, haven't they? Yeah.
They really have.
Yeah.
And you need it. Yeah. But then equally, weirdly, those people can sometimes become as much of the problem as they were the solution because they don't necessarily grow with the business. Mm. And yet they're still required and the expectation is that they'll still be in a senior position and they can be over-promoted.
That's a good one, isn't it? Yeah. And quite often you see any business really, it's started with a group of people, but then the business grows substantially and not all the original team are, maybe got the skills, say, to do what is required to go from obviously £1 million to 100 million or whatever it may be. It's a very different proposition. And I've seen that a lot in my businesses.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. And, you need more experience in the business sometimes, don't you? And it needs to be all right to be able to bring them in at a level above people that might have been, the one and only at one point. Culture is a fascinating thing. And I think, it's probably why I ended up, because when I left our earn out our business, and my view was, because people from agency world were asking me saying, could you help us? Because great journey. And initially I was not interested at all because I just wanted to run away a little bit. I'd sort of had my fill. Yeah. But you end up coming back to it because, I think if you've built a people-based business, there's nothing quite like it either. It's the pain and the buzz all rolled into one, isn't it?
It's a special place, I think, agency. I love my agency of what we've created and think, we are, I guess, growing, not to that rate, but I think, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, we will get to 30, 40, 50 people. It's inevitable, but there are different people that are in the different seats. Some will grow into bigger seats, some will move to the side and do different things. Then you think, well, like that piece around, as you're talking to me, I know that I'll have about 3 or 4 Slack messages coming to me from different people that really they should be, and they know they should be messaging other people in the business now. Yeah. So it's probably just been a bit more firmer in terms of that structure that is there, but because certain people have maybe been here quite a long while, they come back to the founder or to somebody else, and
they do.
Obviously agencies can scale at quite a rate, and change is usually the most difficult thing for some people to sort of run with. So we've gone from 0 to 12 to 50, and then you get maybe an email or a phone call to say we're interested in possibly acquiring you. And I think most agencies get sort of emails like that most weeks, from my understanding. But obviously, some are a bit more believable than others. But obviously, you got the call.
Yeah.
So talk me through that. I mean, I think you've been building pop. I'm sure it's literally just working your. Going for it for was it 5, 6 years at that point, a bit more?
Yeah, so 5, 6 years. Yeah,
5, 6 years. Really carved this content marketing niche. Got known speaking content. Built 50 people, and then you get the call. Talk me through the initial sort of like, sort of processing we could, and this makes sense because as you identified at the beginning, we've maybe hit this. We're trying to get into these bigger firms. We've got a very specialist group of people, very specialist skill set that with 1 + 1 = 3, as you put it.
Yeah.
It's not a daft idea. Let's have a look at let's have a conversation maybe. Let's have a look at the numbers. Talk me through that, maybe that month or 3 before you did the deal.
Yeah, it took a while actually. And so we initially started talking and then we dropped it for a while.
Yeah.
And then we came back to it. So it was sort of there was probably an initial month or so. And then there was a gap. And then there was probably 4, 5, 6 months. But yeah, I mean, you were right. We weren't looking.
Yeah.
I remember it was an email. I remember receiving the email, and I was intrigued because I think, like you say, my mind was very much on the fact that, we've got to really make a decision here in terms of, are we going to like really double down here and, take a risk and start launching different channel teams and, all of that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
Which was going to be our plan. But then obviously this came along and you're like, well, that's interesting because actually they seem like a really nice group of people. They've also got a problem that we can solve. It was a very balanced conversation in that sense. Single founder both sides, which made it more simple as well.
Were you like 100% shareholder of your?
At the time I was, yeah, I was. And, again, we would have been changing that, as part of the next phase. So it was like, there's obviously risk in all of that change. So when you find something that's kind of ready built, but also not entirely going, right, well, we're on the charge here and, we're going to subsume you and that's it. It was very much kind of look, we've got this, we're great at these things, but we're not so great at these things. And, I was like, well, look, we've just been growing so quickly that, it looks great, but there's a bit of chaos behind us because we've just been growing so fast, right? But we've got this problem. And it was a very adult conversation about it. And, that went on for some time. But in the end, I think we realised that, actually, can we bring these two things together and be more than the sum of the parts? And the answer was definitely yes. An independent agency, that did content and performance really well, good listed logos, great team in 2 locations. It kind of had, we were probably, what we were doing was sort of just over a couple of million quid in EBITDA between us, and it was very sort of split either side.
Yeah.
And we were like, that feels like a really nice business to run on with, and there's a lot of cross-sell, upsell that we could do between the two.
And straight away, adding them both, your multiplier would be a lot more than just singling. So just a deal alone would have added another 20% or no, a lot more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, obviously back then, I mean, multiples weren't as good as they were now, or they have been. I mean, obviously there's been a little bit of a dip, although I think quality assets are still getting really good multiples, but there are less of them for sale at the moment. But, I think we ended up getting, 7 times or something like that, 7.5 times, because it varied.
So that's you merging in with Sticky was 7, or the actual final exit was 7?
Yeah, that was the final exit.
Yeah,
with the RPG deal, basically. And yes, there have been deals at that scale that are better. I mean, I'm kind of obviously privy to a few at the moment that are ahead of that.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. And at the time, private equity wasn't an option. They weren't in the market.
Yeah.
And I think had they been, or had I had my time again, that would be the one thing that I'd do differently. Particularly now, because I can see on the inside of those deals, a lot of people think PE run for the hills, but actually I think they've done a lot of growing up over the last few years. They realise, particularly with service businesses, that they can't be the PE of old.
Yeah.
They have to be very collaborative, and a lot of them are very willing to do minority deals now and all that kind of stuff. And what they do bring is a fantastic set of skills around, buy and build. They obviously bring good cash to the table as well, allow the founders to kind of take a bit of money off the table and de-risk a little bit, which ultimately makes them better decision makers.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've seen, again, enough of the inside of, you know, those that have been there to see that it can work incredibly well. And, of course, you come out the other end of a cycle and you've still got some of it. Whereas we'd built a business that was worth a lot more than what we sold it for in the end. I mean, you know, there's obviously positive and negatives to that because, you know, we did very well and the earn-out worked, which is relatively rare.
Because you normally say the word earn-out and there's quite often a bit of a cold sweat in the room, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
You were probably one of the minority possibly out there.
I mean, we trebled during that period.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we really, really grew really quite significantly. And, yeah, it is a rare thing. But, you know, would I have still liked to have had, I mean, let's say we said we sold 50% up front and, you know, we flicked in again to another, you know, mid-tier PE house and still had.
So just step me through that then. You see, you've obviously had the call. You know, we've covered a bit of this, but just to clarify for the listeners, we've had the call. You've had a chat. It's like, yeah, this is. I want to do this deal. This is with Stickyeyes. So there's a money exchange, and then money exchange at that point. I was just putting the two businesses together.
Put the two businesses together. Yeah.
Whereas when you say 50%, that's when you or sold to IPG.
Yep.
So you got 50% up front of the valuation.
No, we took. I'm trying to remember now. No, the money up front was actually significantly less.
Yeah.
I have to be careful. I said it's been that long ago. I can't remember exactly how much detail we can say, but it was actually we took a deal that was less up front.
Yeah. With
the ability to earn much more on earn out.
Yeah. So even though it might have been valued at X in 3 years, if it's, you know, your earn out could be a hell of a lot more, which it was by the sound of it.
It was, yeah. So, I mean, basically they valued it, I think it was 3 different points.
Yeah.
So when you went into the deal.
Yeah.
And we had a multiple on that, but then we also had like basically a matrix that was margin and compound annual growth rate.
Yeah.
And depending on where in that kind of matrix we fell when they the points of revaluation, which was like in the middle and the end, I think, because there were 2 separate payments, was dictated on that day, that EBITDA number, what the actual value would be.
Yeah, yeah.
In simple terms, and yeah, we you know, in the end, funny enough, I think one of the things that we were advised actually by somebody else that had already sold an agency business, I remember at the time having this discussion, that basically said, look, usually in the paperwork they'll put a cap on the total value of what they're going to pay you. It usually feels like a really big number, but just take it out because actually it's a really easy negotiation point.
Yeah, because they think, well, they're not here that anyway, maybe. Or
yeah.
And if they do, it's a knuckle problem to have. Yeah.
Yeah. But we didn't do that. And we would have, you know, pretty considerably gone over the top of it. I mean, you know, it's a first world problem, of course, but I think it's a good tip if people are thinking about selling.
Because I think, you know, I speak to a lot of agency owners on the podcast and just from the nature of doing this for a while. And I think, you know, there's agency owners busy building their agency, busy doing, you know, the business side of things, or, you know, they might be, you know, obsessed with SEO, PPC, but most agency owners are obviously busy building their business. And ultimately, in the back of their mind, depending on where they are on that journey or maybe their age and whatnot, they're thinking, well, you know, one day I might sell it. You know, one day I might sell it. And you know, you've covered a few things there. And I think, you know, speaking to the listeners, what advice, you know, you've been in a few deals there, you know, and probably one deal really for the agency, but obviously it was structured in quite a unique way by the sound of it.
Yeah.
You know, and a couple of deals along the way and the earn out. What would be maybe a few bits of advice for those? Let's pick a, you know, I think we speak to a certain demographic with the podcast. Let's say you're an agency owner doing a couple of million a year. You've maybe got a 500 grand EBITDA.
Yeah.
You're thinking, you know, in a few years' time, I wouldn't mind maybe getting a bit out or a lot out, but I want options. I'm not quite sure. You know, sounds quite nice having an X amount in the bank and doing a bit less. But I might not do that, but I want to have options. You know, what are some of the things that looking back, you know, obviously you did work on or you would recommend to work on a bit more? You know, you talked about, you know, looking at that sort of margin, the compound growth rate. What sort of things, There's the obvious things around valuations, but any real learnings from your sort of almost 10 years in the trenches?
Yeah, do you know what? I remember one of the most concerned I've ever been was the first time we sat down with the corporate development people at IPG. Yeah. Not because they were awful people, they were really great people, but they were talking a language that I didn't understand. Yeah. And when you think about the fact that, you're perhaps going to do the biggest deal of your life, that's a really concerning thing, actually. And I think it was probably that fear that kind of has kicked me on to then want to go into building a fund and spend my entire life around M&A because I knew so little. And so I have learned a lot through that process, and the only really way that you do that is by throwing yourself into it. Yeah. And I think the good news is that if you build and you focus on building a great sustainable business, there will always be a buyer for it. And there will equally always be a structure that will work for both sides. Mm. But, you can be as creative as you want to be with that. And I think, I obviously spend a lot of time with agency founders kind of really digging into this and, spending a lot of time on it now. And, one of the important things that always kind of is a bit of a leaning moment, I think, is going back to your example of the 2,500,000. The difference in multiple as you get bigger, as you kind of touched on earlier, it has a really, really significant impact. And, if you're doing 500,000 at the moment, you're probably going to get 4 or 5 times, I would say, something like that. In, like you say, traditional deal structure is 50-60% of that up front, the rest of it deferred, combination of deferred shares, earn out, whatever that looks like. That's a very straightforward deal. Yeah. But then, if you say that you're growing at 25% and you continue for another couple of years, all of a sudden, let's say you're at 750 to $1 million. And obviously, the $1 million is usually where it really starts to get interesting. But you're then getting, on £1 million. I was a client of ours had a deal on the table, sort of 18 months, 2 years ago for they were doing just over £1 million in EBITDA agency business, and they had a deal sort of 8-9 times.
Big difference.
Big difference. You're talking 8 to 9 million versus 2, 3.
Yeah. Which could be, like say, a couple of years later, depending if you're focusing on specific levers around growth, margin.
Yeah, and so I think that's always an eye-opening thing when you actually write that down and work through it on a fairly okay, normal, achievable, compound annual growth rate. All of a sudden you can create a lot of value. But then equally, there is a lot that goes into that decision, and there's risk along the way and all of that sort of stuff. So, there's no right or wrong answer. Mm. But I think understanding that and modelling that out is a really key first step. And then deciding what sort of, life you want to have for the next few years as part of that. Because, are you not done yet, but this is about building a $100 million top line business? Actually probably is the right way, because, you have the ability. They're going to expect you to stick around, and, you're going to be in a 3 to 5 year cycle, and then you're probably going to go again. Yeah. But, in the end, you could do very, very well out of that. Or, are you getting to the end of your career, want to do something that's, completely different and it's eating at you? I know of a business that sold relatively recently where that was the case, and they took less because of it from a multiple perspective.
They wanted to get out.
Yeah, but they got 90% of their money up front, and they were happy. So it comes back to what do you want out of this?
Is it quite buoyant at the moment in terms of M&A for agencies?
Yeah, if you've got a good business, yes, it is. There's no dearth of buyers. Yeah, and PE are falling over themselves. Their pockets are so full. But of course, for that world, really, you need to be, at least £1 million bottom line, and really sort of kicking on towards
EBITDA.
Yeah, really. I mean, there are exceptions to that. And of course, increasingly agencies are looking at EOTs now, so employee ownership trusts.
You see that more and more here.
You do, which is an interesting model. Obviously, MBOs as well, management buyouts, they're becoming increasingly popular, and they can work for lots of reasons.
So when you did I'm intrigued to know, from a personal point of view, so obviously merge with Stickyeyes, so there's 2 founders.
Yep.
But did you then obviously 2 shareholders, but then did you then also with key staff members, did you sort of What's what I'm looking for? Did you
do we have options?
Yeah, options.
Yeah, we had. Yeah, there was a large, particularly in Stickyeyes. Actually, there was a large options pool already in existence.
Yeah.
So yeah, the senior team, and you couldn't have done it without it, right?
Yeah.
And neither should you. But yeah, the kind of the senior team there, who were very experienced, had a nice chunk of the business, and it was really that actually I think really propelled us. And I think interestingly, there was a ratchet on the EMI. So what that really means is that the bigger the business grew, the more of the share of the upside that they got. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, like as a founders, you're protecting your first X, but then you're going, well, actually, if it's above X, then I'm happy to give them more.
Yeah.
It's that kind of
That's
premise.
an incentive.
Yeah, exactly. And of course,
Yeah.
what that does is it massively motivates them. And we absolutely got there, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to sort of leave the business operationally, halfway through the earn-out, a bit further along for me, but early, because we had such a brilliant, motivated team.
But did they know that you were planning the exit? They were all walking towards the exit. Yeah.
Everybody was very much on the same page there. Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling we could go on for a few hours, Simon. I feel like we're just we're just getting going. But I think running an agency is not all smooth. I think you've literally you've had the story there of literally like it's almost like a fairy tale.
It wasn't that,
but I can imagine some of those. I'd imagine there'll be founders listed, and me included. When some days are just a bit crap. Some days are a bit tough. You've done all the stuff we talked about. It's still maybe not going in the. We're sitting here in the middle of summer now. It's maybe quite a challenging time, certainly for a lot of agencies I'm speaking to at the moment. When things are a little bit tough, what would you say to the agency owners that are listening now? When things are a bit tough, what do you go to? What's your sort of inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, it is not a straight line, is it? You're right, and you're going to have those down periods. And I remember on a couple of occasions as having a bit of war room kind of conversations, because things were really bad, and we had a period where we lost 20-30% of our revenue quite quickly, and that hurts. And I think it's where I think leadership is really the key here, and irrespective of how that plays out, you've got to almost over communicate, I think, because whether you realise or not, your people see what you see, and if it is tougher out there, your people will worry, and they'll fill the silence with conjecture and all of those things. So I think we had a radical transparency kind of view to communication, and we'd have an all hands weekly where I was really honest. We'd give it a bit of a shit sandwich, as we call them. They call it.
We use the same
good, bad, good, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that nothing was a surprise, and everybody's an adult, aren't they? And we took everybody along that, and there were occasions where we had to make difficult decisions and cut our cloth, and all that kind of stuff, because you have to stay lean and ready and all that sort of thing. And I think as long as you're really upfront about it and you do that in the right way, it's how you do it, that really matters.
People appreciate that more. They're on board as well, aren't they? If they know that they are. That the founder is sharing the sort of almost warts and all to a degree. Yeah. And
then it's, ultimately the key thing there is it's a revenue challenge, isn't it? Most often.
Yeah.
And, then it's all hands to pump, and how do you build a culture where everybody's willing and able to contribute to that sales and marketing effort?
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I've got a couple of final questions. Would you do it all again?
I've been asked that several times, and I think the answer is no. I think the idea now of, starting from scratch and, winning your first £10,000 client I think it's quite a difficult thing, unfortunately. But, it's why I do what I do now, really. It's why I spend still a lot of time with agencies, as a consultant or Ned or whatever. Mm-hmm. And because you're still able to play a part, but without having to do the first, £1 million of value, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
the harder bit.
But yeah, still love it.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
Yeah, still love it.
So what's on the roadmap for you? Obviously, you've talked there about your consultancy, but what's your sort of plans for the next year or three?
Yeah, I mean, I think, whilst Scaled was very much born organically out of the fact that, I could see that the lived experience that I'd learned from over here was really helpful and, remove some of that pain. So I think continuing to do that, and, you know, sort of broadening out that to a wider B2B kind of audience, I think makes sense. But, you know, also really fascinated in that, you know, the kind of the PE journey as well. And I think, you know, how, because I'm going to learn from that, because, you know, I wish I'd done that deal, so I can see how it can be really, you know, kind of value accretive. And, you know, you can work with some really smart people, and, you know, I'm really looking to sort of looking and diving into that. And, you know, particularly with agencies, because it's where my main skill set lies. So being the conduit between the investor and the operator a little bit.
Connecting with, fantastic. Well, I like to finish every episode with a book recommendation, Simon. Do you have a book to recommend to our listeners?
That's a very good question. Do you know what I always go back to, and actually probably now, I haven't read it for probably about 15 years, but it's probably really out of date, so I'm not saying read it, but Boston Consulting Group did a book, probably back in the 90s now, sort of Boston Consulting Group on strategy or something like that. I remember it's a sort of red sort of cover. And I think the reason why I really like that, because it really opened my eyes to the kind of the importance of good framework and strategy. And, you know, I think from that, it kind of led me to think quite differently about how to build business and, you know, how to separate just doing stuff from planning stuff. So, yeah, probably really out of date now. So I'm not saying read it, but I think because of what it was at the time that I read it, it made a big difference to my life.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's sort of planning actual real stuff and doing the right things is usually half the problem for most agencies to get that growth, because they're just busy doing something but maybe not the right thing. Same for their clients. Well, thanks for coming on the show. For those that want to find out more about your journey and what you're doing at Scaled, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, usual way, right? So Simon Penson LinkedIn, or simon@scaled.co.uk. Reach out. Happy to have a chat.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast, so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the next one.